Hi, Julie. How are you doing? Thank you so
Hi,
much for joining us
Michael.
today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's so nice to see you again after such a long time.
It's nice to see you too. It's been a while. Well, we
Yes.
have a lot of questions for you.
hmm
So let's jump in. So first of all, you're a vocalist, you're a session vocalist, you're an artist, you're a live performer.
hmm
Would you say that it's important for an artist or a session musician to diversify their income when it comes to making money as an artist?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, everyone has their own path. So I would say, like, I don't want to have. I don't want to seem like I have the one answer, but I definitely have several paths or streams of income there. So I'm mainly a studio musician. As you know, I'm like a session vocalist for video games, films, documentaries, TV. But I'm also a live performer. So I perform with, for example, different orchestras or at game events. And the other thing is that I'm also a speech and language therapist, which has actually been my first occupation or my first job. So I went to university to study medical speech therapy, and that's what I'm still doing on 2 days of the week. So the week always starts very structured with speech therapy. And so I have like clients that have voice problems that they want to overcome. Or I also have some transgender women who want to adjust their voice so that it sounds more feminine, for example. So it's really interesting. And then the rest of the week is typically vocal session work, and sometimes there's concerts or music travel. I do think it's very important to have different streams of income because if one of them breaks away, you can still lean on the others. And I also think it makes for a very interesting life in this way, that you don't always do one single thing, but everyone is very different in this regard.
I like
Yeah,
that. So
so
you never
whatever
get,
works best.
yeah, and you never get a boring day, I suppose, because every day brings its
Mhm.
own challenges and its own joys and things. So it's really interesting how you balance that. Do you find that sometimes you get a week where it is quite difficult to balance all of these different things?
Yes, sometimes, of course. For example, if there's some really intense studio deadlines, then going to the speech therapy practice and then just focusing on the patients can sometimes be a bit hard because you're like in your head, you have this kind of timer that is like, oh, but I should be working on my session deadline. But usually it works out really well and in a good balance. And I feel it always like focusing on other people and their voice problems. It really brings me into the present moment. And it's kind of beautiful to focus on what they need in the moment instead of what I want to do, what my vision is creatively. So I really enjoy having both. But yes, sometimes as life happens, things can be hard to balance together, definitely.
Do you find that it helps having that diversification of what you do? It helps you to be more organized with your time?
Yes, I think that is part of what is very important there, that you really have to be very intentional with your time and what you use it for, because you can't just be like, okay, let's then maybe do it tomorrow, but you have to really be structured and focused. And I know some musician colleagues, they don't really like that, like to have their time this structured. And some of my colleagues really love that. So people are just different. So for me, being structured and organized really helps me. So it kind of helps me to stay focused and to reach the goals. Yeah.
And how different is it when it comes to recording vocals for video games and film scores
hmm
compared with other things like rock, pop, or metal? Is it a completely different mindset? Is it a different technique? What really are the differences?
So the first difference that comes to my mind, which is a bit funny, is in some of the metal projects I've sung for, there was not so much of a focus of that the recording had to be super clean because it's gonna be like full of metal sounds and growls and like drums and heavy guitars anyway. So that is always like a thing to think about. But in all honesty, I think singing for soundtracks oftentimes has a more classical approach. to singing. So you have more vibrato, for example. You oftentimes sing in fantasy languages or in different languages of the game universe you're in, for example, or vocalizations where you simply improvise different syllables. And in rock, pop, metal, I feel there is always this kind of song structure, which I also really enjoy, where you have like, I almost always like real lyrics that you can then sing. And I really enjoy both, I have to say, because with, for example, the vocalizations, your voice becomes more of an instrument. So you use these vocalizations to convey the meaning of the vocal instead of having the lyrics. And I really love both. So yeah, I love both worlds.
And how do you look after your voice? Because I imagine if you have like a particularly busy recording week, it can be quite a strain. And also, does the whole speech therapy thing, does that play a role in kind of give you the knowledge that you can apply in looking after your voice?
Oh, definitely. It really shaped how I view my voice and how I react to it when there's a little cold, for example, when I get a little cold or a sore throat. But the main important thing I've noticed is that, for example, in our industry, everyone is really focused typically on hustling and working hard and getting everything done in time, which is very important. But I think sometimes there's a bit of a focus that is too much on pushing and working hard and hustling 24/7 without taking weekends, without taking the evening off, for example. And in voice therapy, what I've noticed with my patients is oftentimes them having more work-life balance also affects the healing of their voice, because it means that the whole body can regenerate, and it's so important to have that. So I'm a really big advocate of work-life balance. Honestly, I'm very on point with the deadlines and everything, and sometimes you just have to hustle, of course. But all in all, I would always say take the weekends off if you can. Every weekend you can take off. Definitely do that. Spend time in your community with your family and friends, because that in return will inspire you and regenerate your body. So your vocal cords and all the anatomical functions can also work better. So yeah, it kind of the speech therapy kind of gives you a bit more of a holistic view on all of this, which I really appreciate.
Amazing. I think that's really good advice about taking time off, whether you're a vocalist or not, because it definitely affects your mental health too. What would you say has been the most challenging thing you've had to overcome in this line of work?
It has been overworking, actually, this year. This year, at the beginning of the year, I noticed we just came out of a lockdown winter in Germany. And I've noticed that I've just kind of compensated with working on music every single day, morning to evening, and kind of never stopping and resting. So I also didn't take my own advice there. And I think it's just very easy in our industry to overwork because it's very encouraged and it's seen as virtuous and that you really want it. And so I noticed that I was kind of nearing a kind of burnout. But I wasn't there yet, thankfully. So I took some action to come back to have more work-life balance, and it was really helpful. But it just goes to show how easy it is to kind of fall into these patterns of always working. So I think that has been my biggest struggle in this industry so far, to kind of stop the activities that I loved because of deadlines and trying to kind of do everything all at once. And sometimes I think it's just super important to just, it's always important to finish the deadlines and to get everything done. So sometimes it's okay to not have weekends, to not have evenings off and all of that, or to do an all-nighter every once in a while. I just think that sometimes it can become a kind of an automatism that even when the deadline is over, you continue to work continually without taking breaks. And so I would say that has been my biggest kind of challenge this year. but it was so helpful to notice that it's an unhealthy pattern. And so now I feel very in balance to get my deadlines done and to have this joy in music and ambition and passion and drive. And at the same time, to really take time off, for example, for hobbies, for my family. And I really feel it kind of inspires you to go back to music. So you go back recharged and feeling inspired because you actually have something that you experienced in your life outside of music.
I think that's true because music is a language, isn't it? And you have to be able to talk about something. And if you're not living, if you're not having some time with friends or family or hobbies or whatnot, then it's hard to communicate, hard to speak music in a way that you're enjoying it. And I think, do you feel that sometimes because we enjoy the work we do, we cross that line very naturally into overworking, and then we don't notice it, and it gets worse, and then we start hating what we're doing because we're doing too much of it and not resting. And there's this constant habit of being a creative type where we go from doing just the right amount to too much, cutting back, just the right amount to too much, and the pattern is always seems to be crossing that line.
Yeah. Oh my God, I feel you. Yes. Yes, totally. I think as composers, you also have more of that kind of, so the deadlines go for like months and months and months and months, even years, and then the project is finished. As a vocalist, as a session vocalist, I feel it's more like having lots of different continuous projects that have deadlines. So it's not like one long project normally, except for example for Horizon Forbidden West or Horizon Zero Dawn, that were always like super long projects for me as well. Which I really enjoyed. But yeah, I think the pattern still is very similar there, to kind of just overwork, but then still enjoy it because we love it so much, right? That's why we do it. But then in the end, get to the point where you are kind of like slightly burning out, and then you can't get back to the state of joy for the music. And it's kind of like a cycle. Yeah, I totally recognize that. I think it's also kind of natural to have that a little bit in anything you love to do, that it's like a bit of an up and down in how much you love it, or if you just kind of go through the motions of it sometimes, and then other times you're really inspired again. I think that's pretty normal. But also, I think if we could all get to a point collectively where we sometimes overwork a little bit, but it's never to this like extreme that we have in our industry right now, I think that would be really great. I think everyone would benefit from it.
I think so too, yeah. Do you ever have the problem where if you got like a long-term deadline and you think, okay, I can do lots of these short ones along the way, and then what happens nearer to the end as the short ones get done and you're coming close to the more long-term deadline, do you find that sometimes around that area where the overworking occurs because perhaps we said yes to one or two jobs too many, and then we're trying to make sure that we obviously keep our promise and hit the deadline, but then that's where you pull the all-nighter or you work 2 weekends in a row?
Absolutely. I think it's very human that happens. And isn't it always like, if you know your deadline is a bit further down the line, you still don't start very early, right? Because then you're like, oh, there's more pressing deadlines. Like there's more urgent ones, more urgent projects that I can do. So yeah, I totally relate to you saying that. And I think we just have to also keep in mind that we're all human. And maybe that's also where good organization and structure and planning comes in again. But yeah, I'm also not perfect in that regard. But I think as long as we get the deadlines done in the end and then understand how our minds work, so that next time we can make it a bit more easy or a bit more structured, I think that's a good way to go about it. And just remember that we're all human.
Yeah, exactly. And speaking of bigger projects, how did it feel to record the vocals for Horizon Forbidden West and also Zero Dawn? Because did you know when you were doing that project did you have a feeling that this was going to be such a big one? And obviously you had that feeling when you were doing Forbidden West because you already knew the success. I mean, there was like Lego things being made from the game and stuff like that.
Yeah.
You know, so how did that feel? And what was your experience like?
So what you said right now, it really is very fitting because in Horizon Zero Dawn, none of us had any idea if it's going to be a success or not. So we just kind of, we were all very enthusiastic about Aloy, the protagonist, and about the world of Horizon, but we had no idea if it's going to take off or not. So we just worked on it, and it did feel a bit indie, even though it wasn't. And then for the second game, of course, we've seen the resonance and that it was one of Sony's flagship games at the point. So of course there was a very different kind of mindset going into it. Vocal-wise, in the first one, I used a way more like breathy and head voicey approach. In case singers are listening to this, maybe that's interesting to relate to. And then in the second one, Aloy was way more focused on who she was. She already knew who she was. And so I used way more chest voice there because it's a bit like stronger. And so kind of Aloy grew in these 5 years between the two games. And also musically, our team grew, and vocal-wise, my vocal technique, of course, is now a bit different than back 5 years ago. So it was just, you asked how it felt. It's my favorite project to date, honestly. Next to singing for James Newton Howard, of course. That was exactly 5 years ago today, by the way.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, it's today, 5 years ago. I just realized it an hour ago. It's singing in Aloy's world and for Horizon has been one of my favorite projects, and it's so beautiful to see the resonance from the fans and everyone playing it. And it's just been beautiful to sing for the composer team and with the other vocalists and musicians. It's been very special. It's dear to my heart.
Yeah, I mean, it's such an incredible project. The whole thing, everything down from the animation to the gameplay to the music to the people involved, the voiceovers. It seems to me that they kind of put so much care and love into every fine detail of this, right down to every note of music, that it was almost, it seems to me, looking, when we look at it from where we are today, that it's not surprising that it was such a success. How did it feel at the time when you first were involved with the project? Were you under the impression that this might be really big, or what was it hard to tell at that point?
It was super hard to tell. It was a how do you call it, a first IP? So there's not been any Horizon before that, obviously. But I remember very distinctly when I saw a first mock-up of the very first E3 trailer back in 2015, where I sang Aloy's theme for Joris de Man's amazing music. And I remember watching just that mock-up of the trailer, and I just thought, like, this red-haired girl, she's so cool, like, who is she? And this world is so lush and beautiful, because normally post-apocalyptic worlds in video games are oftentimes like very gray and bleak, and like, yeah, very apocalyptic. And so this world was so lush and full of these very strange robot animals. So yeah, I was just very fascinated. And then I'm not sure if I ever told you the story how the trailer music came about and how the theme evolved.
No.
But so Joris had the task. I hope I'm telling the story correctly. But Joris had the task to come up with a theme for the trailer, for the E3 trailer, which was the very first trailer of Horizon. And so suddenly he came up with Aloy's theme, which is now Aloy's theme. But back in the day, it was the trailer theme. And then he asked a colleague of his if he knew of a vocalist that he could work with. And the colleague was Ian Livingstone, who I worked with at the time on Total War Attila. Sorry, I just said Total War Gorilla. No, not Total War Attila. So then Joris and I just had a quick tryout for the theme, and it then went on to become Aloy's theme. But we had no idea in the moment. It was just like a demo thing. And much of the demo vocal actually ended up in the end product, like in the final theme. So yeah, we had no idea. It just kind of happened, and then it was there.
Amazing. And what's your workflow like? So you received the I guess maybe not a rough of the backing track, but being completed in terms of mix, and you probably receive a brief, I'd imagine, and notes and things like that. From that point, what does your workflow look like?
Okay, so what I receive in the beginning is can be so different from time to time. So in some cases, I just get like a very rough mock-up of what the music will be like. It's just like you have the rhythm and a piano file or something, and then like a different piano file that plays what the vocal should sound like. Other times I have an almost perfectly mixed backing track, so it's very different what you get from each project. But from that point on, of course, I'm looking through the brief of the composer, what they want me to specifically focus on in the music at different times during the track. And then I typically love to record things on my own. So I know that some colleagues, they use, I'm not sure anymore what the software is called, but Audio Movers is one of them. Oh, yeah. And just different software where you can collaborate in real time. And I personally, sometimes I do that. But I also really love when I can just kind of be the architect of the vocals in the moment. and kind of so I record a few takes, then I listen back to them, then I see like, oh, okay, so maybe I want to emphasize this note a bit more, or do something different here, maybe add an ornamentation so that there's like different versions. And then I will send off a bunch of different versions to the composer for approval, then hear back from them if there's something else they want to add to the track vocally, or if they want changes. Of course, that's also like part of the process. So that's kind of the workflow I love the most. But everyone is very different. So some vocalists or musicians I know, they love to work in real time and try to connect online during the session.
Do you prefer doing it alone because you can kind of get into the mindset, into the zone, imagining the story or the character that the theme is for? Whereas if somebody's watching, you just you know they're there, and it kind of affects you.
Yeah, I think it does affect me. So, for example, if it's a real-time vocal session at someone's studio, or if they're in my studio, then it's different, because that's what I also really love. But for some reason, this kind of online thing where it sometimes then the connection drops, or it kind of distracts me from the musical flow, I feel. But then again, maybe I should just try it out more. But I just really love to kind of immerse myself. I think like being present is a big theme in my life in general. So if I'm present in a session with someone in real life, then it's really, really good. Then I love the kind of collaboration that happens. Or if I'm really present with the music on my own. But for some reason, that kind of online collaboration does not feel... I feel like I get a bit distracted from the music, from the musical process.
I can relate to that. Same with guitar sessions. I prefer to be by myself, and I'll play better. The minute somebody's in a room, I'm not that good.
Wow. Yeah, it has an effect, right? That's cool to hear from you, because it's interesting to hear from other musicians how it is for them.
Yeah, definitely. It helps you to get in the zone, I guess, when you're with your own thoughts. But for me, I described this to somebody before as it feels like I'm reading a book, and somebody is looking at me here. Is how I feel when I'm recording and somebody's watching me. You know what I mean? It's like I can't focus on the words. I'm just so consciously aware of them being right here.
Yes. Yeah, totally. Yeah, I totally relate to that. I think that then it comes back to knowing ourselves, and of course being open to try new things, but then also just to know some musicians, they also really love the kind of guidance in the moment, so that the composer immediately says like, no, not this way. And then they really want that guidance in the very specific moment. I just love trying out different things and different interpretations, and to kind of connect with the music spirit, if you will, and then just send different versions, and to have that collaboration go in this way.
Definitely. What about software and equipment? What do you like to use?
Okay, so I'm a Cubase user, and let me see. So my main microphone is the SE Electronics RNT. It's a really, really good tube microphone. I mean, you also know that I'm an SE Electronics artist. You connected me with SE Electronics because you're also an artist with them. And yeah, so ever since I had that microphone, I've been really loving it. I feel it has an amazing detail and clarity. And I also love my Manley cardioid, what is it called? Manley cardioid reference microphone, because it has that warmth and bigger than life effect. So I use both depending on what I want in a score. And then I have a master keyboard, of course. And also I have an Apogee Duet as an audio interface. And very important for me, living in Munich in a small apartment, not trying to disturb any neighbors, I have an Isovox vocal booth, and it really helps me with the sound quality, and because it's a very clean and dry sound, and it helps you to not disturb any neighbors, which is great if you want to sing for an extended period of time, which I normally do. All in all, I really want to say that up until 3 years ago, I was using this microphone, just a very normal Rode NT1A, for any recordings I did. So it's like, what is it, 150 euros? I'm not sure, but it's a very reasonably priced microphone. And I don't want to advertise for this microphone in specifically. I just want to make a point that in general, just having somewhat solid and good equipment is, I think, the way to go. And you don't always need to use the most expensive ones. Because with this microphone, I've recorded for League of Legends, the audition for James Newton Howard, World of Warcraft, the first one, Horizon Zero Dawn, and just so many different projects, and it worked super well. But yeah, now having a bit more advanced and expensive equipment, it does make a difference. But I also think that it's very important for people starting out to not think that they need super advanced equipment or high-end ones to even start being a vocalist or start being a session musician, because it's just not true.
Yeah, absolutely. I think YouTube has this thing about products and always pushing the next biggest thing, doesn't it? Especially in the music world, because it is fun. It's fun, all the gear,
so
but it's
fun. Yeah.
It's not where it's at, is it? It's the music is where it's at, and if you're good at music, then you'll become more successful with it, and then you get better gear. But like you said, you can do the job with non-expensive gear. It just needs to be reliable, and you need to have the skills to deliver.
Yeah, and oftentimes I feel, especially with microphones as vocalists, it's such a personal choice. So, for example, then to find a microphone that just works well with your voice is so much more precious, or it's so much more valuable than having a high-end microphone that doesn't fit your voice so well. Yeah. So I think it's just important to find something that works for you. And as you said, to just start out with the equipment that you can find and focus on delivering a clean and dry recording. But I do now really enjoy the tube microphones I can use. They are really amazing.
That's good advice. What advice would you have for young ones who want to become professional vocalists today, especially given like how the industry has changed in the last few years as well? It is quite a different world we live in now. Like, so if you were starting today, or if you were speaking to somebody who was starting today, what advice would you give them?
My advice would be, first of all, the work-life balance thing, because I had to learn it the hard way. I think that's very important. Of course, you can't always afford to have work-life balance if you're starting out. That is, you also need to be realistic about that. You have to put in the work and effort. But I still think it's important to have that kind of mindset that eventually you want to have some balance there. Another thing is, I think it's just as important as your creativity and your vocal abilities and your craft. Just as important is the business aspect of things. So do you know how to negotiate? Do you know what is normal regarding business contracts, or how do you go about networking? So I think these things are also super important. And lastly, I would say nowadays, when you start out, I think it's a really, really unique and good time to make videos for YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, showcasing what you can do. I think that is really where it's at the moment. A colleague of mine, Colm McGuinness, he's an amazing vocalist. He does this kind of like Viking style vocal. And he's been doing YouTube videos for some years, and he always showcased his kind of like Viking and Celtic vocal qualities. And now he's on so many video game and film soundtracks because of that, because people found him on Instagram and TikTok and YouTube. Amazing. So I think nowadays that's a really good way to kind of start, and then build your network of people very organically, very slowly. Bring some patience with you and just connect with people in an authentic way. Develop friendships with other musicians and composers.
Good advice. Yeah, the networking aspect, organically, that's a really good way of putting it, because you're right, it is friendships, and people like working with people they like. So if you have friendships, true. you're gonna get work through that, and of course, it works both ways, doesn't it? You meet people through other people. If you could go back in time and give yourself some specific advice when you very first started, and it could be business advice, it could be work-life balance. What advice would you give yourself?
That's a really good question. If I could go back in time, definitely I would like to give myself all the business advice I know now, because for me it was a bit like trial and error, like back in 2014 or something. It was really trial and error and just hoping for the best. And but also I asked a lot of like colleagues who were further down the vocalist path than I was, or Tina Gu gave me so much advice back in that time. And so yeah, I would like to give myself the business advice I know now, and I'm trying to make it a point that when young vocalists contact me, that I just give them anything I know, just in messages, in voice messages, whatever it is, just so that they don't have to go through the trial and error phase so much as I did years ago. I think it's valuable to pass on the knowledge. And other than that, I would say, little Julie, like, trust your speech therapy, work-life balance, vocal health thing. Like, don't get worked up in the hustle culture. I think that would be the advice. Kind of like, trust your body and the wisdom of your body.
Great, yeah. And how does it feel? Like, you've been doing this for a while now, this line of work. Mm-hmm. How does it feel when you hear your voice in games and in trailers? Do you still have that same feeling from when the first time that happened, or has it normalized, or do you still get really, really excited when you see it?
Yes, it has not normalized at all. I'm not sure if it ever will, if you need like 10 more years to then feel normal about it. But I've been doing this since like my first video game was 2015. So I've been doing this now for 7 years. And it's still not normal at all. Like every single time the Horizon Forbidden West like login screen comes up, when someone plays or I play, I still freak out. And I don't know. I'm not sure if other people are like cooler about it. I just can't. Also, when I hear colleagues of mine in a film or in a video game, I freak out the same way. Like I'm just so excited. It will always feel surreal. Yeah, not sure how this is for you, Michael.
Well, I'm glad you said that because, yeah, if I'm in a cinema and I know people who I work with and friends that are on that film score, I'm like whispering to someone, like the person next to me, like, that's Tina on cello.
Yeah.
That's Sandra on violin. Oh, that's Julie Elven. And they must hate sitting next to me. But I'm like, for me, I'm really excited. Like, I know these people. This is amazing. And I feel like so happy that, you know, I'm able to experience hearing people I like and friends performing, you know?
Yeah, I have the same. Exactly the same. And then always like, did you hear like this version of the like main theme coming back here? Wasn't that amazing writing like from this and this person?
The problem with it is people think, oh, they're just name dropping again. But it isn't even that, is it? It's the work. It's the fact that you know the person and the work is really great.
Yeah.
And it's that combination and you get excited about it. And everyone's like, oh, they're just name dropping.
No, it's just so genuinely exciting. And it's so beautiful. And I think we have to like remember the fact how hard it is to even make a living in this industry or to even be on soundtracks. So if we hear a colleague who did it and who is on there, it's just amazing. It's just such a joy.
So with that in mind, would you recommend to new ones beginning on this career path, would you recommend them putting in the time, practicing, getting good at their craft and aiming in this direction?
Absolutely. I think it's very important to be very focused and to also just develop your skills further. For example, if you want to be a session musician, can you read sheet music? Can you read sheet music efficiently and quickly enough to do the session? How is your intonation like just the very like technical aspects of music, but also what is the unique part of your voice or how you play your instrument that could stand out. So for example, back in the day I had classical singing lessons, and the breathiness of my voice, that is kind of my signature style, the classical singing teacher always wanted to get rid of it and was really frustrated with me because in the breathiness and the high register is just there. As a voice therapist now I can explain why it is there, but so it's just like an organic thing that my vocal cords do. But I would be so frustrated that my voice was not like the other classical voices. But then I kind of noticed that it could maybe be something that I could use as my signature sound instead of always trying to work against it. And then it became my sound. And I think it's so important to kind of realize what are the little things that can make you unique, in addition to just the technical aspects of your craft, that make your sound recognizable.
Definitely, because that's your unique selling point. That is your brand, and it would have been a real shame if you got rid of that. If you did, get the classical vocals down, but at what cost? You could have gone down a very different path. But I'm glad that you didn't, and you persevered, and you kept your voice.
Yeah, it was interesting back in the day because I wanted to be a pop singer first, but my voice was not really pop enough. Then I wanted to be a classical singer and then a jazz singer, and I just didn't really fit fully anywhere. And then I discovered cinematic singing. I was like, you know what, I will just try to listen to my heart and what wants to come out creatively. And so I started experimenting with the sounds my voice could naturally make instead of always like pushing the label of like jazz or pop music or classical music on it. I would really encourage everyone to just to experiment and to find out what is kind of their unique sound that maybe others don't have, or that you might think of yourself at first as a disadvantage.
Very well put. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Julie. We will look forward to seeing what you do moving forwards. And I highly recommend everyone to follow Julie on Instagram, Facebook. Where else is a good place to follow you?
Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. I'm also now on Hive, but that's not really very evolved yet. I'm on YouTube and Spotify also with my music.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Michael. I would have loved to ask you all the questions in return that you asked me.
I'm glad that you didn't, because my answers are way more boring.